Hi, everybody. It's Stephanie Kraft and Adam Sanchez. Hi,
Hello.
Adam.
Thanks.
And we're back with Enlightened Connections and our video series on understanding narcissism. And this video is called The Basics Part 2, because after Adam and I did Part 1, we realized there's a lot more to talk about when it comes to the basics of understanding narcissism. So the first topic here is that there's a spectrum or a continuum with narcissism. So we have the, classical narcissistic personality disorder. And then all along that, there are lesser and lesser degrees along this spectrum or continuum. So Adam, why don't you tell us more about this?
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. So we're talking about a pathology, right? I mean, especially if we understand oneness, right? We're all connected. Everybody has a little bit of everything, and that's a normal part of life, right? We all have different character traits, and in small degrees, a little bit of narcissism can be healthy, right? Where you're saying, no, I don't allow this. You can't take my money. This is mine, right? That's a little narcissistic to say mine, but that's okay because it's a self-preservation mechanism. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not pathological at all. Now, when we're talking about the pathological levels, we are talking about a spectrum. So in general, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
Just listening.
So in general, we have this spectrum, and it has to do with the trauma that we had talked about from last week that creates this pathology. But on the spectrum, let's start with from the beginning. It's cluster B personality disorder. And that B stands for borderline, or, the cluster is the idea that the trauma that the individual has experienced has created a cluster of different kinds of personalities or, alter egos or different pieces of themselves that may not be conscious of each other. Like they may have a really nice side and they may have a really mean side, and they don't necessarily see that they have that mean side, right? That's part of that cluster of personalities, or borderline personality disorder. That's where the B comes from. So it's borderline narcissism. They're not actually narcissists because they characteristically still have compassion. So this is where, we're starting to get into the understanding of the spectrum. You have the pathologies, but there is still the capacity for compassion or empathy with the cluster B personality. So that's at the very beginning of the spectrum. It's, I would say, the only hope of, healing if you're on that spectrum, because you still have the ability for compassion, which is where the healing comes in. Now, this is a pivotal distinguishing characteristic. When you lose that compassion, then you are pathologically dealing with a narcissist. And so that's the distinguishing figure, the compassion or empathy or lack of it. And so when you have the narcissism, they're going to have all those traits of the cluster B. They're going to be self-serving, they're going to be manipulative, they're going to be controlling, but they don't have the compassion. So it's more intense, it's more pathological, it's more cause for suffering and misery. And then on the same spectrum, we're getting up higher. So you can kind of think of it as a pyramid. Every portion of the pyramid has the pieces below, but the base portion may not have the ones above, right? So cluster B is actually not a narcissist, but a narcissist is, has those cluster B components to themselves. So on the very next level after narcissist, we have sociopath, which is basically, narcissism to the next level. That is, sociopathological, meaning someone who's actively going around and, causing chaos in the world for their own means. This is the characteristic trait of a con artist, right? Because they have no emotion. They don't care about their actions and how their actions affect the world. So they're willing and ready to steal and lie and cheat from people without any remorse. And then at the very highest level of that pyramid, the pinnacle, you have the psychopath. And the distinguishing characteristic there is that they'll, again, have those lower traits, but at this point, they're ready and willing to kill, that they don't have any remorse to that level. And so this is our little pyramid of narcissism that we can refer to. And just understanding that some people are in the cluster B area where they have compassion. So don't get confused, because they can deliver a lot of these traits of narcissism, yet still have compassion. And then the turning point is when they lose that compassion, then it's totally pathological and they're essentially a lost cause.
Yeah, and we all have narcissistic traits and tendencies, right? It's just that some have a little bit and some have a lot. And then, like you said, when it gets to that extreme lack of empathy, for example, they have narcissistic personality disorder.
Mhm.
And so, like in a later video, Adam and I will talk about how one can be introspective about this and work on releasing those, because that is possible in the lesser degrees of this, and not as possible or easy for the true narcissistic personality disordered person to be able to be introspective and release these tendencies.
Right. I just wanted to add one last thing, because you're right about that, and the pathology will stop them from having those introspections and making any progress. And that's because these traits are survival mechanisms, from the reaction to the trauma. And it's interesting to know, right? Because let's say you're not, or you're not dealing with an actual narcissist, you're dealing with someone who's cluster B, or you yourself may suspect yourself of being on that spectrum. It's the traits themselves that become the survival mechanisms, so you find yourself as someone who may expressing all of those traits, but it's not necessarily pathological, because the empathy is there, because the ability for self-reflection, growth and change is there. So it can be tricky if you're dealing with that. Again, if you keep it simple, just looking for the empathy, again, if you're asking yourself, am I a narcissist? Almost categorically, you're not, right? Because you have the capacity for that self-reflection, where the pathological narcissist does not, by their very nature of the pathology, have that. So it's just important to understand how these pathologies work and what they look like and how to navigate them.
Yes, although I have known a couple of narcissists who do admit that they are a narcissist. So
it's rare, though. That's very rare.
Yeah, but I just wanted to throw that out there, because it is possible to recognize it and still not be able to heal it or release it from your personality, because that is what
thank you for adding that. That's true.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's fascinating to see that happen with people. So we're gonna, jump around from topic to topic in terms of things that the narcissist will do, their behaviors, things about them. And one of the things that they do is called triangulation. And this is when they will bring in a third party into the relationship that you're having with the narcissist. So triangulation, of course, it creates the triangle. They can do this with more than one person, but it's generally what they do is they'll start talking about another person to you in a way that creates conflict. So, and in a way that will create jealousy, in a way that it comes in between the two of you in your relationship. They use a lot of tactics and manipulation in this triangulation. Do you have any examples of that, or anything else to say about triangulation?
Well, it's like pitting people against each other, right?
Yes, that's what it is.
You'll see it a lot if you pay attention to it. Once you understand the mechanism of what it is, you'll see people do that all the time. And a lot of us kind of brush it off like, oh, they're just kind of like doing their own thing in their own self-interest. But that's actually a form of pathology. They're causing suffering to others because of their own motivations and self-interest.
Yes, they're doing it on purpose, whether it's a subconscious thing or a conscious, but they are definitely, it is something that they are actively doing. And so, there's you and I talked a lot about the range of emotional topics that with a narcissist. So do you want to go ahead and talk about the emotions?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for reminding. Also, I wanted to clarify something that I had mentioned in the first video, to say that it's like they're an automaton and they don't have a connection to their own emotions. That's not actually true. They do have an awareness of their own emotions. They feel them, but it's decidedly selfish. Their connection to emotions is only about themselves. It's their own emotions only. It's not a connection to other people's emotions. And it's really, again, a kind of survival mechanism of input and output, stimulus and reaction. Their emotions are basically subject to the outer world because they don't feel like they have control over their emotions. They project that responsibility onto other people constantly. That's one of the characteristic traits, right? Them making other people constantly responsible for their own emotions. So they do have emotions, but it's a different kind of emotion. It's extreme in most cases. You know, it's out of touch with reality quite often. You know, projections and fantasies and delusions. In fact, you know, it's just a barrage of lots of things, you know, and they have a lot of shame and self-hate inside of all of that, right? Because this is what happens with the narcissist. They most likely had narcissistic parents themselves, you know, because of the trauma that their parents had experienced, and the cycle continues. And so as a defense mechanism to survive living in that narcissistic household or in that narcissistic environment, they learned to not take responsibility for anything as a defense mechanism. They were so projected upon having to take responsibility for everything that the impulse was to do the exact opposite, which is to take responsibility for nothing. And then it eventually becomes pathological. You know, at first what became a survival mechanism turned into a pathology, which is causing more suffering. So that's the main point I wanted to make about the emotions. And we'll talk a little bit more about the shame and self-hate in a second, what that looks like.
Yeah. And there's something called narcissistic rage. And so you can have a narcissist be pretty, you know, kind of even keel for a while. That a lot of the times they have a lot of anger, which it is apparent and it does come out. But sometimes when they're pushed too far, they will explode into rage. And this is very common. This happens probably with every narcissist who has narcissistic personality disorder. And this is usually when they're confronted with something that they're not willing to look at. They will go into a rage and blame the other, you know, divert all blame to the other and take no responsibility. And another interesting thing about them is that they have a very hard time to take themselves, you know, in a humorous way. Like, you can't make a joke about them. They can't laugh at themselves. It becomes an insult. They can't handle it. And most of us can actually laugh at ourselves and find ourselves pretty humorous, and it's not a big deal. It seems like a lot of narcissists are not able to do that. There's another category, a way of categorizing narcissists, and that's the overt narcissist and the covert narcissist. So an overt narcissist is the narcissist that we all know, that we can see, that draws attention to themselves, becomes the center of attention in a room, is actually does lash out at people in public, does make belittling comments and condescending comments to people, shows their narcissism out in the world. I mean, if there's a boss at a company who's a narcissist and they're an overt narcissist, everybody knows. It's not hidden. They abuse openly, and they also are on the other hand, can be very charming and drawing a lot of attention to themselves. So, but the covert narcissist, their narcissism is hidden. And usually it's, and if you're in a family, or if it's your spouse, if it's your parent or your spouse, the narcissistic abuse is happening behind closed doors, in private, where nobody else can see and nobody else knows about it. Nobody else could even fathom that it's happening. That type of narcissistic abuse is very insidious, and the victim of it even if they told someone what was happening, it's very hard to describe the behaviors. And also the other people who know the narcissist couldn't believe it because the narcissist knows exactly how to act with others when other people are around. And there's no way that anybody would ever suspect that that person is actually hurting emotionally and psychologically and mentally abusing the victim. And a lot of times with the covert narcissist, when the child grows up, if they decide to go no contact, the narcissist will have, because when a narcissist can control you, they destroy you. So if the child grows up and goes no contact, they'll actually, talk badly about that child to the other family members, to the family friends, to paint a picture that's negative and opposite, really, of that person, to turn everybody else against the one who has gone no contact. And this is in the case of the covert narcissist, where nobody ever saw any of the behaviors that led this now adult child to go no contact. They've never seen it. They never knew. They couldn't fathom it. And so they believe the narcissist, and they also turn their back on the one who has gone no contact. This is very common. And it's the same if you're a spouse married to a narcissist. If it's a covert narcissist, this is hidden. This is secret. Nobody knows. Everybody loves the narcissist, thinks they're the greatest person. And when that spouse leaves, the narcissistic spouse does the thing where they're turning everybody against the spouse who has left and painting a very ugly picture of that person. These people, there's a term called flying monkeys, and the flying monkeys term means that it's a little bit, variable on this theme, but it's when the narcissist turns other people against the victim and uses them with their agenda in their story to get back at the victim. And this is very common in cases of divorce. For example, they will utilize, narcissists use people. They only view other people as objects for their use. So they will, identify the family members and the family friends that they can use to go after the victim. Actually, they're using them for their agenda to destroy the victim who has decided to leave, because now the narcissist can't control that person. So they're getting their posse together. These are called flying monkeys if you are, interested in the lingo in this field. But did you want to say a little bit more about like the overt covert narcissist?
Yeah, I do have a question though, or maybe just a little call for clarification. So it sounds kind of like the flying monkeys is the triangulation, but on loudspeaker.
It's a little bit different because, so in triangulation, you are still having a relationship with the narcissist, and they are bringing someone in to create conflict, drama, jealousy, or whatever between you. So you're still interacting with the narcissist.
And so they can gain more control over the situation than you.
Yeah, and the other people, when the person decides to leave, that they then utilize others to go against you.
Okay, so they are actually similar, but the defining characteristic is that in triangulation, you're still in contact with the narcissist versus the flying monkeys, it's at the end of no contact.
Yeah.
And obviously much, much broader in scope.
Right, because this is how a narcissist can create, in a divorce, for example, how they can build their case even is to use other people. And even if it's not a case of divorce, they're still using other people to destroy your reputation, to interact with you. I mean, they'll actually use people to interact with you to keep the abuse going, to draw up conflict and trauma. But in certain cases, separate side note, and I think I mentioned it already, an adult child could separate out from the narcissistic parent and then lose all contact with the rest of the family because the narcissist has then badmouthed and manipulated them. So all of a sudden they turn into the black sheep when really they were abused and victimized, and they're just trying to survive. And it's pretty unfortunate. I know a lot of people who have a narcissistic parent and they tell me, I can't go no contact, or I don't want to go no contact because I don't want to lose my other parent. And they know that if they went no contact with the one, a lot of times there's a codependent couple. So the one who's not narcissistic is not going to be able to maintain a relationship with that child because the narcissist is controlling them. And the adult child knows, if I go no contact with my narcissistic parent, I will lose both parents. It's so common, and so many people stay in this abusive dynamic for years and suffer with it knowingly, just because they don't want to lose that parent. This is an epidemic.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And also, just to add on the covert versus the overt, I think the covert in a lot of ways can actually be more dangerous psychologically because you don't necessarily know it's happening. With the overt, it's pretty obvious. You can kind of figure out that something's not quite right, even if you don't know anything about this and you don't know for sure. You kind of it's obvious, at least on some level, because it's expressed in the open. With the covert, I think it's a little bit more of a psychological minefield or even a labyrinth to navigate through, because you're not even necessarily sure, as the receiving end on this abuse, whether or not it's happening.
Yeah.
Because the narcissist is a professional at denial, deflection, projection. So on the covert levels, it's harder to see. And I think in the end, it's just really important to just look at the compassion. Do you see authentic compassion? Do they express authentic compassion in your relationship with them? Just keeping it simple on that level can sort through a lot of the muck, I believe. So,
I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up, Adam, because you are so right. I mean, you can be the victim of a covert narcissist and be questioning yourself and questioning their behavior for years and not really sure, is that person a narcissist? Is this really happening? And what it can take is watching a video like this or reading articles, watching other videos to really allow it to dawn on you that you really are dealing with a narcissist. And in the meantime, they've destroyed your self-esteem, your ability to trust your own emotions, your own feelings, even your own thoughts, because the narcissist is continuously destroying your self-esteem, invalidating your every thought, your every word, your every emotion. And so it can take a long time to see. I didn't actually know that I didn't know what narcissism was until I was 40. And I had already gone no contact with my mother several years prior. But then when I found out that it was an actual thing, what happened was I was looking up. I had known somebody that I was sure he had some kind of personality disorder. I had no idea what it was. So I was doing research online about personality disorders. I got to a website called Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers. And I read that website and I started crying because I saw for the first time in my life that what my mother had or was doing was actually a thing. I had no idea. But reading the website, she was textbook. textbook, like every single thing. Okay, there are different kinds of narcissists, and if you go on that website, for example, you know, you'll see the kind of narcissistic parent that will neglect you, and so on and so on. There are a lot of different categories, but she had all of them. I mean, everything that she did was on there. And so I only realized what it was at the age of 40, even after going no contact. So a lot of people are dealing with this. They don't know it's a thing. They don't know what it is. And once you realize what you're dealing with, what it is, then you can better navigate these relationships and how to exit them, which we will talk about in future videos. So I feel like you might have had more to say about, or did you have anything else to say about the covert and overt? I'm not sure.
No, I think that was pretty much it.
Okay. So do you have another topic you want to discuss?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit more about the emotions, because, you know, it's such an important part of our experience here on this planet Earth, you know, our emotional experience, and often overlooked, often neglected, I would say, especially in our very mentally dominated American culture, where it's just like, well, what's the logic? What's the reason? What's the science behind everything? And that's fine. You know, there's a place for that. But there's real importance in the language of the soul. I think emotions are the language of the soul, and they speak to us. And so when we're talking about a narcissist or this narcissistic pathology, the emotions are very, very key, and even volatile and intense and full of trauma and just pathologies. So it's pretty simple. It's a cycle, it's trauma, it's drama, and it perpetuates itself. And so, you know, the narcissist probably had narcissistic parents or some kind of pathology or some kind of trauma that had them feel shame and self-hate, so that usually it's the projection of the narcissistic parent onto the child, again, that has them project that responsibility away from themselves. But because they were filled with such shame, that's why that mechanism developed in the first place, right? They were constantly being fed with shame, not being actually nurtured by anything. I mean, you know, so that created that pathology of, well, I am bad, I am wrong, I am, you know, not worthy, I'm not lovable, right? So on a subconscious level, it's not even conscious usually, because that's why it's pathological, right? If it were conscious, then it would be able to be addressed. But because it happened in most cases so young, you know, in most cases without any reconciliation or avenue towards healing, it's unconscious at the stage of adulthood or as it progresses into more of the advanced stages. So, but at the very core of that personality of pathology, you have the shame and self-hate that keeps it crystallized and perpetuated. Because of the deep levels of shame and self-hate, it is essentially almost impossible for the narcissist to take responsibility for those own shames. And so also you can look at, and this is an important distinguishing characteristic to make in healing in general, is that a responsibility doesn't necessarily mean blame. So in fact, I don't think it does in most cases. And if we're talking about the narcissist taking responsibility for themselves and their emotions, that doesn't mean that they're to blame for being shamed. It's not their fault that they were shamed from a narcissistic parent, but it is their responsibility to deal with the emotions that were created in that trauma. But because of the nature of the pathology and the deep levels of shame and self-hate, it creates a bubble where they're not actually capable of making that inquiry, because anytime they ask the question, am I responsible to this? It brings back all those wounds of being held responsible for everything, even things that weren't their fault. So it's like they can't even touch it. They can't even go into the inquiry of taking responsibility for their own emotions, for that shame, for that self-hate. And that's the source. The shame and self-hate is the source of this behavior that they're in denial of, but then has it perpetuate because it's unconscious, and then it creates this vicious cycle. So I wanted to point that out because, you know, not only does it have everything to do with denial, it's also delusional, because the denial is so pervasive that it basically creates a fantasy world where, you know, they're perfect. There's no need for them to inquire about their own strengths or weaknesses. As far as the delusional personality is concerned, they're nothing but strengths and there's no weaknesses. And, you know, and it can be even more grandiose than that. You know, people thinking, oh, I'm going to be a rock star. And sometimes they actually do achieve that. And you can see those pathologies in a lot of celebrities, I think. Not to say that they all are, but, you know, that's what it looks like. You know, when you have these deep levels of denial, it can create fantastic levels of delusion and feed into the pathology, feed into the narcissistic story and the drama, and people who want to agree with their story because mostly usually they're codependent and not sure, you know, where they stand in relationship to that pathology or that narcissist.
Yes. Excellent. All excellent points. And I just want to, you know, repeat that denial is a huge theme with narcissists. Massive, massive denial you will see in many different areas of their life. Really, denial about everything. Denial about what they feel and what other people say. And I mean, just every category of their life, there can be denial. You know, going back to the emotions, I don't remember if we touched on this today, but the narcissist can have really strong emotions, and it's in reaction, and we're talking about negative emotions here, and it's always self-centered. So I've seen this scenario play out quite a number of times with people where, let's say there's a woman married to a narcissistic man, and the woman finally has had it, and it's like that breaking point, and she knows that she's going to get a divorce and tells her husband, and this time it's serious, like she's leaving. The man will go into the deep emotion, crying, you know, where maybe they had never cried, you know, in front of her, but they're crying constantly every day. They're in depression. They beg her not to leave. They can't handle it. Now all of this emotion, we could look at it and say, wow, he's, you know, really upset and he doesn't want you to leave. He must love you. And that is not the case. A narcissist cannot love another person. They do not have the capacity within them to love another. They don't have, it's not in them. They don't love themselves. They don't know what love is. They can't feel love. They're empty in that way. And so when the man is actually crying and begging the woman not to leave and saying that he'll change, he's not feeling that he's not doing that because he loves her or he feels like he's going to miss her. He's doing that because she's an object that he has gotten very used to, codependent, with, that he needs in his life to function. He feels that he will not be able to function in the world or in his life unless he has this one who helps him do things, you know, cook and clean and take care of the house and kids and just be that partner, that object of a partner, to make him feel whole because he's empty. And I've seen it so many times with people, and that behavior helps the woman stay. Oh, he cares, he's going to try. And then as soon as she decides that she's going to stay, he reverts back to the, you know, the distance, the not paying attention to you, all the rude behavior, all of the narcissistic abuse starts right up again. They can't maintain any type of change. They never did change, even though they said they would change, because they didn't. They'll use anything. They'll use tactics to make the woman stay. They will even turn on the charm, turn on the romance, bring the flowers, and they'll do anything to keep that object with them. But it's not a person that they love, and they don't have feelings for that person. And so when we see a very strong display of emotion with a narcissist, it's always self-centered. And so I don't want anybody to be fooled that, oh, I'm seeing, maybe they're not a narcissist. They then question and they tell themselves or ask, maybe he's not a narcissist because I'm seeing this emotion, I'm seeing this crying, I'm seeing this even effort, which is usually very temporary. But that is not about the other person. It's always self-centered. Think about a 2-year-old. If a 2-year-old, you know, is crying it's always about themselves. It's the phase that they're going through. They're not crying because their mom, you know, stubbed her toe and got hurt. That's not their mentality yet. They cry when they have needs that aren't being met. So yeah, I wanted to, you know, put that out there because it's pretty confusing for us when we witness such strong emotions with a narcissist.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you did. I think that's empowering and very important for people because it's very tricky and even insidious and complex. It can take on many different forms, almost like shape-shifting. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I think it's really important. You know, they can express what might look like compassion, right? As, you know, or remorse, right? They're crying, but actually, as you said, it's about themselves. So it might be a good idea if you find yourself questioning if they're, you know, narcissistic or not, ask them, well, why are you crying? You know, what are you crying about? And if they tell on themselves, like, oh, I feel really bad because, you know, I don't want to be that kind of person. Is it about them or is it about you? Are they feeling remorse for what they did to cause the other pain, or are they feeling remorse for themselves and their own loss? And so that's another thing I wanted to point out. It's not just a codependency. It is a codependency. It's so perfect also that you mentioned the 2-year-old, right? Because that's probably where they still are on that level of their consciousness, that part of the 2-year-old part of them that never got their needs met. And so they're stuck in that meeting place. They're just concerned with meeting their own needs. They're not concerned with the needs of their partner or anyone else around them. And so they have this pathological expression of that, you know, just destroys the relationship over time. And then to the point where if the relationship's ending, they want to, it's called the Hoover, right? To hoover the person back, because it's not that they're actually sad, but they're losing their narcissistic supply. It's called, it's the energy, the attention, the love, the adoration, the support, you know, the coddling, whatever it is that they're getting from their partner. Once they lose that or in their threat of losing that, then they try and get the person back because that's basically their survival ticket. It's basically their meal ticket, whether it's literal or energetic. They're just trying to, again, manipulate the situation for their own pathological survival mechanisms, which happens to be narcissistic.
Yes, and the narcissist may feel that they may confuse the feeling and think that because I feel this strongly, I must love the person. And so they say, I love this person so much and I want her back so badly, or else I feel like I might die. But what's really happening is the re-traumatization of their abandonment wound and their attachment wounds. Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head right there. Yep, yeah. That's it.
Yeah, that's what it is. So they don't love you. That's something that you need to come to terms with, which we will get into in our video on healing from narcissistic abuse. But we, the victims of narcissistic abuse, cannot be in denial. We have to work our way out of denial and realize these people don't love you. They are using you and you are an object to them.
And very importantly, and that's nothing to reflect on the person being used. It's not that, you know, if a narcissist uses me or used me, that there's something wrong with me. That can keep me going back into the relationship, trying to rectify that, to prove to myself that I am worthy. It's because of them. It's because of their own lack of self-love that they're not capable of loving another. And of course, that makes us ask the question about our own self-worth, whether we choose to stay in that dynamic or not. And, you know, the lack of self-love is essentially the pathology, you know, in perfect horror, because we need that as human beings, you know, and again, you could say that a little bit of narcissism is self-love, that's self-preservation. They call that the reptilian brain, right? That's okay to, you know, get your food and your water and your needs met. But life isn't just about needs. Life is actually meant to be a spiritual journey on many different levels, multidimensional, you could even say, right? So staying stuck in that is definitely stunted or arrested development. But because the narcissist, I mean, lots of people don't get self-love, right? But with the narcissist, it's so complete that they don't have the mechanism to grow from their own mistakes, because there is no self-love as a container to accept the mistake as something not inherently wrong with them, as something that's just, you know, a challenge to be overcome. For the narcissistic personality or mindset, if any mistake is, you know, annihilation, any being wrong is, you know, more cause for further suffering and their own survival is threatened. you know, in the mental realms. So that lack of self-love actually ends up being a pathology. And so it's important for us to have compassion for them, but that doesn't mean excusing the behavior or permitting it in any way, shape, or form. Just to understand that the mechanism, the driving force behind this is a deep, deep lack of self-love and self-hate. And that's why these behaviors come out, you know, so heinous behaviors that lead other people to doubt their own self-love, you know, their own worth, and because it's really coming from that pathology.
Yes, exactly. And on that note, I think that we've covered it. Do you think we've covered it?
I think we've covered the basics. Yeah, I think that completes the basic components. We are going to talk about how to deal with narcissism and, you know, go no contact when we develop enough self-love for ourselves, right? Self-love is the remedy. Maybe, you know, some narcissists someday will take that on for themselves, probably in their next lives, you know, if you believe in that sort of thing. But we get to be the ones as cognizant of these mechanisms and these dynamics to bring in the self-love for ourselves, to not put up with these behaviors, to rid ourselves of our own narcissistic behaviors if we adapted them from just trying to survive in this narcissistic world, and making sure that coming back to that self-love, that self-compassion, compassion in general. But when we master that self-love, it's pretty much effortless to love others, no matter if they're narcissistic or not. We don't have to change anyone once we come to that place of self-love.
Bingo.
It's an honor to do these videos with you, Stephanie Kraft. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your support and your love here with me and everyone watching these videos.
Oh, thank you so much, Adam. And same to you. You're a very wise being, and thank you for sharing that wisdom with everyone. And we look forward to doing our next video in this series very soon, and we will see you then. Bye, everyone.
Stay tuned. Yeah, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share so we can help each other heal from this collective psychoses.
Yes, thank you.
Blessings.
Bye-bye. Blessings.